Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the sixth week of the Rugby Research and Injury Prevention Group 2025 lecture series. We're going to start out tonight with our featured speaker, Dr. Simon Roberts. Dr. Roberts is a research fellow at the University of Bath and a member of the World Rugby Science Group. Dr. Roberts, when you're ready, please share your screen.
Okay, thank you. I will. Oh, I have to request sharing, so I've just hit request.
Yes, you should be all good to go.
Okay. Um, okay. Can everyone see my sort of home screen? Just checking. I'm on the right, and everyone can hear okay. Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for all the introductions, everyone. Like I said, it's always nice to talk to this group. There's always a diverse range of people studying and practicing, so it's really nice to be talking to your group again. I've done it now for a few years. I didn't realize when I look back at my previous presentations how many that was, but it's always nice to do it around this time of year. Um, as said in the introduction, my name's Simon Roberts. I'm a research fellow um, at the University of Bath in England, and I mainly research in rugby injuries, and I've been doing so for a number of years. I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing. Um, my screen's not advancing. Um, okay, beg your pardon. So just to introduce where I'm from, obviously we're from the city of Bath in England. It's a tiny city, but very beautiful. It's got Roman architecture. We have the famous Roman baths, and we're a rugby hotbed. In fact, our team won the English Championship and the European Championship. So we're on the rise, which is excellent. And the picture you see in the right of the picture there is our home stadium. By a lot of standards, it's very small, but it's special because it's embedded right in the middle of the city, and people like that. So Bath is a rugby city, and unfortunately, we at University of Bath do a lot of rugby research. The two sort of go hand in hand a fair bit. I'm from the Within the University of Bath. We are the centre for the Department for Health, and within that, we're a research centre for health and injury and illness prevention in sport, nicknamed CHIPS. It could be a healthier acronym, but that's what we came up with, and that's what we're sticking with. We've co-combined with the University of Edinburgh up in Scotland to be one of the 11 IOC research centres of excellence. And there's a picture of our group there outside the Monaco conference, the latest one, 2024. So we're expanding group, and we combine a lot of clinical expertise, which is mainly from the Edinburgh side, with the Bath expertise, which is a lot of injury epidemiology, biostatistics, injury prevention. So together we combine to sort of complement each other in those ways. Geographically, we're quite far apart. Not in terms of US, but in terms of the UK, we're far apart. But we're able to meet up regularly, and so yeah, that relationship's only 2 years old, so we're still developing that. But it's great to be a part of. So I'm going to zone in a little bit about my research now. So we have the acronym CRISP, and again, another unhealthy acronym, but that's for Community Rugby Injury Surveillance and Prevention Project. That kind of encompasses all the work we do in youth and adult community injury surveillance. But my main focus is on the adult, and that's with men and women. I'm going to be talking about the men's data today. It's a little bit more mature. We have more years of it. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, just to introduce you to how we work in terms of the English playing levels. We have levels 1 and 2 are Premiership and Championship. They're kind of professional. And then with community levels, so amateur, start at level 3 down to level 9. Level 3 is quite high standards. Some people are paid, semi-professional, right down to level 9, which is very recreational. So within that group, we've got quite a range of playing levels. And within that, there's a huge number of players playing. England has a very large playing population. There's over 30,000 players playing each week at these levels. A lot more if you look at other second teams and lower levels as well within that. The levels go down below 9. So we're looking at a large number of players there, play rugby each week and potentially exposed to an injury risk. So we have the Community Injury Surveillance Project to understand more about the nature of injuries in this group and how we can prevent them. So we've been running for 13 seasons, more now. I'm going to present up to season 22, 23 in this particular data set. And we run English men's community clubs. And we have about 50 to 60 clubs participating in the project each season. It's voluntary at this level. Clubs volunteer to take part, mainly through altruistic means. They don't have a lot more incentive other than some feedback we give them. Beg your pardon, my slides are advancing on their own. So I'm just going to rewind. And over the course of the project, we've had over 300 different teams that have participated. That's out of a pool of about 850 teams across the country. So we're looking at a good proportion of teams that have taken part over the years. And data collection is by data coordinators at each club who are nominated with clinical expertise to be able to report on the injuries. We keep the reporting burden fairly low in this project because these are amateur clubs. They don't have full-time staff. So we collect just match play injuries. We do not worry about training. And we just look at greater than 8-day time loss injuries. That's to reduce the number of injuries that the teams will be reporting and to keep it consistent across the different playing levels. And we also include some game event analysis, not particularly important for this particular presentation, but we do include some analysis of games and video analysis of tackles when we want to do more in-depth analysis on risk factors. So in terms of how we've run the project over the years, here we have the seasons down the left-hand column. The core of our work in the project is obviously injury data collection. And those 8-day time loss injuries I mentioned, that's been the consistent theme throughout the whole of all the seasons that we've been taking part. We've collected data now up to season 2024-25. We are planning now for season 25-26. We've only introduced women's teams in 2021-22, probably a little bit late, but we're building the number. There's a lot of interest in this country. We're hosting the Rugby World Cup later in the year. So that will increase the profile, but the amount of research in the women's game is increased massively. So we're a part of that. We're gaining more and more data, but in terms of the whole project, it's still a relatively young data set. For the first 3 seasons, in terms of the injury data collection, we also collected medical attention injuries. So when the physiotherapist or what would be the athletic trainer in your terms who would attend to a player, then we registered those injuries. So they're less severe ones. So we wanted to understand a little bit more about those. And I also did a study on some player self-report injuries through SLS, a very, very basic measure, but we wanted to trial a way of players self-reporting through a very, very simple means. And then as well as the injury data collection each season, we always have additional projects that we try to understand more about the injuries in those projects. Throughout, since 2018-19, we've included teams that have artificial grass pitches, so we can understand the risk on those different playing surfaces, grass versus artificial. And like I said in the previous slide, we also have, we've included match analysis right at the start of the project, where we've just looked at the number of events in a game, and we repeated that a bit later on in the project. And more recently, we've done more in-depth tackle analysis to understand more about the risk of injury in the tackle and about what characteristics of those tackle result in injury. And then we've also looked at some functional movement tests in terms of player risk, in terms of how well they move. And we did our Activate Injury Prevention project, which is an injury prevention exercise program. We piloted that and then did a full randomized control trial. It feels like a long time ago now, 2015-16, but we still talk about it because it was very successful. So that was introducing what is now Activate, and that's now World Rugby's injury prevention program for community teams. So it's had a huge amount of reach, that project, and we have that now as our resource across England Rugby as well. That's fully accessible to community teams. So they have videos, resources, coach cue cards to be able to coach their players to be able to perform injury prevention exercises better. It's packaged as a warm-up, so teams use it as a warm-up. I'll talk a little bit about that in relation to this talk further at the end. And then we create and activate based on the RCT. And just recently in 2023 in July, so just preceding the 2023-24 season, there was a reduction in the height of the tackle. So I'm just acknowledging that where that sits within this data collection. We've now collected 2 seasons of data with that tackle height. So we're looking at the effect of that. So if anyone's not familiar with rugby, sorry, I should have introduced rugby more. I'm assuming everyone knows a little bit about rugby, so apologies if you don't. But in rugby, the previous legal tackle height was at the shoulder. So when someone goes in to tackle someone, they could hit them shoulder height, not above, but from the shoulder down. In 2023, July, that was brought down to the height of the sternum. The idea being that the tackler and the tackle player, the ball carrier, would reduce the possibility of 2 heads contacting or head on shoulder. So they're reducing the height of the tackler on the ball carrier to around about that middle area, perhaps going lower. But it's mainly to reduce that head on head space. So that's at its infancy. We're just processing the data from the previous season now to understand a little bit more about how effective that has been. But we will share results when we're able to. So in terms of the incidents that we've seen, this is overall injuries now. So this could be any body site, any injury type. So I just want to show you the overall injury rate incidence. So the graph here shows you how the incidence has increased, and it has increased over the course of the project. The grayed out area is a season where we did not have due to COVID-19. So that's the only season we've missed. So we can see, there's certainly an increase there in the number of injuries that we've seen. If we introduce severity as well, the severity has remained relatively stable. It increased slightly in recent years. And then when we combine the incidence and the severity, we get the burden. So the incidence is the number of injuries per 1,000 player hours. The severity is the average number of days lost per injury. When we combine them into the burden, we get the total number of days lost due to injury. And we see the burden was increasing slightly, and then we had quite a much higher burden after COVID, season 21, 22, and 22, 23. That's mainly a function of that incidence increasing a fair bit, but also severity just jumping back up after a reduction of a few years. So that combined to increase that burden. We're hoping that burden will come down when we're processing our latest data, but that's generally how the incidence, severity, and burden look over the course of the project. So when we break down all the injuries into body sites, here we have all the sites. This is a severity incidence matrix. So we obviously severity on the vertical axis, incidence on the horizontal. So where you don't want to be on this particular graph is top right, high incidence, high severity. The top 5 injury sites, ankle, thigh, knee, shoulder, head, account for 68% of all of the injuries. So it's really those 5 that really have the biggest influence. And what does stand out here as well is the knee. So the knee has the second highest incidence after the head. Of course, the head is driven up by concussion. That's for another talk. We can talk about that for days on end. But the head is high mainly due to that. But the knee is the second highest incidence, but the most severe injury. So it's the highest average number of days lost. So that's why the knee is of a particular focus. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that knee data now. So this is now the incidence over the course of the project for the knee, and we can see there's a fair bit of movement in the data. As of course we break down injuries into specific sites, there will be a little bit more less confidence in the data as it jumps around a little bit. But we can generally see here that there's been an overall increase, certainly after COVID, of a higher knee incidence. This figure here shows, again, the same incidence, but this is broken down by playing levels. So if you remember on my very first slide when I introduced the playing levels, we had levels 3 and 4, which are our sort of highest level. Levels 5 and 6 are mid-range. Levels 7, 8, and 9 are our lower range. We group them as 3 groups to make analysis a little bit simpler. And again, we can see here generally there's a little bit of jumping around. Generally speaking, the incidence is higher across across the course. It's higher levels 3 and 4. It doesn't always play out in the data because there's a little bit of movement, and then levels 5 and 6, and then levels 7, 8, and 9. But not a great deal of difference in those different playing levels. So the players at levels 3 and 4 will be better conditioned. They're a little bit younger, a little bit more ambitious. They might go on to more professional careers. But they also might play at a higher intensity. So you have the offset between them being fitter, better athletes, but also being involved in more contact events, probably higher intensity. As we go through the levels, that intensity comes down, but of course the players aren't as well conditioned. So there's always that sort of balance to strike. We're just moving on now to the match event, so how those injuries are sustained. So we have a fairly basic measure when the injuries are reported. We just ask whether the injury was as a result of a line out, scrum or ruck, tackling, being tackled, or if they were running. We don't have a lot more detail than that. Running combined, straight running, plus changes of direction, any non-contact type of running. So what really stands out here when we look at the event is those players who are being tackled have the highest incidence, a lot higher than when players are tackling. And of course, second highest is running. As you imagine, as I mentioned, there's a lot of lateral twisting, turning movements in rugby union where players could sustain those injuries. But I think the takeaway from this slide is the fact that being tackled has by far the highest incidence and a reasonably high severity as well. There's a lot less injuries, obviously, with the scrum. We have less overall anyway in terms of all the injuries, accidental collisions, lineouts, rucks and mauls. They're a little bit less important. And now we have the same data, the same severity incidence matrix, just presented as injury types. We do have the slight caveat for the community data in terms of, as I mentioned before, we don't have full-time clinicians. So sometimes the diagnoses can be non-specific. So we do have diagnoses of ACL, MCL, PCL, sort of chondral meniscal type injuries and patella. But unfortunately, we also have a fair few injuries that are reported just as knee ligament, which couldn't be diagnosed further. So again, there's a little bit of a weakness here for community data, but it does provide an idea that when the injuries are diagnosed, we're looking at MCL type injuries causing the highest incidence, and then ACL having the highest severity. And then I hope you can just make out this slightly lighter gray bubble is the ligament non-specific. So that could be, unfortunately, any one of those other types of knee ligament type injuries. But again, it's a fairly high incidence of those. So yeah, the takeaway there is that there's a range of different types of injuries, but obviously MCL, ACL really sort of stand out. And then we have the incidence by month. So we have the highest incidence in the early of the season. So the rugby season in England starts in September, and then it goes through the winter months, and then getting a little bit warmer again through to April. So there's this type of finding is similar to when we look at all injuries. We always have that high spike early in the season, September, October, and we attribute that to a lot of these players maybe not be particularly fit to play. They might not have a really long pre-season when they first start playing, so they might not be fit enough. In September and October, September certainly the grounds are a lot harder. We've just come off the end of the summer where the grounds are hard. The grounds generally soften then in November, December, January, possibly February, and then they firm up again in March, April, if we're having a good spring. So we think across all injuries and knees as well that that could be a factor. I also think there's a possibility here that kind of a survival type approach whereby the players who are more prone to injury get injured earlier in the season, and that's particularly the case for knee injuries. then that takes them out of the pool of players who are going to get injured later on. And so that sort of increases that incidence earlier in the season. Those players prone to it get injured, but they're not in the pool of players later on. And I think that's the case possibly for knee injuries because they tend to be some of them are quite severe. So those players who get injured earlier on could be out for some time during the season. And then my student who put this together also mapped on the types of injuries onto the season. This doesn't show, I don't think, anything particularly, just generally that the types of injury tend to follow the same sort of pattern in that they all reduce over the course of the season. Yes, we do have that spike in MCL in March, which is difficult to explain. But when we look at the general pattern, all of those injuries are reducing, and that's not surprising, really. It's the mechanism by which they're injured is probably more important. And then finally, just looking at playing position in terms of forwards and backs. I have not to put a legend on here, but FR is front row, so they're the biggest sort of forwards, the ones who do the hard work in the scrum. Second rows are the taller ones. BR is back row, they're the flankers who tend to do a lot of the running, a lot of the tackling, and we think that is why, again, the same pattern in knee injuries is the same as all injuries. Those back row players tend to have more injuries. And we found that over the 14 seasons of all types of injuries combined. And we think that's because of the roving role in the back row. They tend to run more and tackle more than a lot of other positions. And then we have scrum half is SH, inside backs at the centres, IB, and outside backs, OB. Not a lot of difference between them. And when we break it down into forwards and backs, there's not a great deal of difference. It's mainly that back row position that are pushing things up slightly for the forwards overall. So in terms of what I was mentioning, I've sort of summarized the epidemiology of those injuries, and what we can see from the knee is that there's a fairly high incidence, and they can be fairly severe, so they can have quite a high impact on community teams. And that's part of the reason why I'm coming back around to the Activate Injury Prevention Program, which I mentioned at the start. And this is the program we use as a warm-up for teams to improve movement, pre-activation, conditioning, and some stabilization type exercises. But there's also a particular lower limb focused on this program as well, with a lot of knee control, ankle control type exercises. And when we break down the program, I always think, and people are trying to pick and choose what exercises they do, I'm always trying to push those movement and control of the lower limb exercises. I think they're particularly important for the adult athletes and for the developing athletes. And what we found when we did our male RCT, we did a schoolboy and an adult randomized control trials, and we got a significant reduction in lower limb injuries for teams that did the Activate exercise compared to teams who did their normal warm up. So we have the evidence to say that it improves it as well. The lower limb was grouped by ankle, thigh, knee, but generally speaking, a lot of those injuries were in the knee that were reduced. So I think that's the results of this study certainly show that using the Activate program can be beneficial for those teams. We just need people to use it effectively, and we're working on that and getting it out to more teams. So just to conclude, the overall knee injury incidence, I've got concussion there, sorry, that's from a previous one, has increased over the seasons of the project. I've got here an explanation as well that the number of injuries could be a function of the fact that more tackles have happened in a match. I haven't presented the data here, but when I showed you that initial slide where we did match analysis early in the project and in more recent seasons, one of the basic findings that we found just in terms of match events is that there's more match events now in rugby matches generally. So there's more tackles, there's more rucks in terms of those contact events. And as we know, a high proportion of injuries happen in the tackle and rucks. So more of those in a game, there's going to be more injuries. So we think it's partly due to that. What we aren't able to measure is the intensity of community rugby. So while we know there's more events, we don't know if they're more higher impact or more intense. we weren't able to code for that. But there's a possibility that, over the course of this project, as a fairly prolonged period now, conditioning has improved. We tend to have a trickle down effect where coaches come from higher levels more often now, and they improve conditioning of their players, and the players sort of perform at a higher level. But that's something we potentially could look at in video analysis in terms of some of the coding we can do. And so just generally, this just really demonstrates the importance of injury prevention exercise programs. I guess another just sort of conclusion on that and something to think about is when I talked about in community rugby now, we are reducing the height of the tackle. One of the unintentional consequences of that could be that players start tackling very low. And when the risk factor analysis was done by Ross Tucker and Matt Cross in professional rugby, they found that yes, the chance of injury was lower when people didn't tackle high, but it actually started increasing a little bit the risk of injury as well when teams went very, very low. So there's that risk of head-on knee. So I guess there's a caveat here to us trying to improve the game, trying to reduce head-on contact, where we don't want players to go too low because that could increase the amount of knee injuries. Again, that's something we could start looking at in terms of our analysis post tackle height change. But I think it would take a few seasons to be able to get enough injuries to be certain of any response to that. So just finally, just always acknowledge we're funded by the English governing body, the Rugby Football Union, that's the RFU. And of course, we were very grateful to all the participating teams that take part each season. They mostly do this just out of interest of the game and wanted to give something back. So we're really grateful for all those clubs who take part. And finally, Dr. Keris Coley and Dr. Ben Gompels, they've both been medical elective students who have contributed to this data analysis. Ben in particular is desperate to get this published and has been pushing hard. So hopefully you'll see this in publication at some point. But thank you very much for listening, and I'll take any questions if there's time for any, or if anyone has any interest in that.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. And like you said, we're going to open it up if anyone has any questions, or Dr. Lopez, if you have anything to add.
Good evening, Dr. Roberts. Thank you again for such an excellent presentation. Regarding the trend of, I guess, more tackles occurring as the seasons have progressed, I thought it was quite interesting that even though there was roughly a 2-year gap due to COVID, it's still, I guess, the incidents did shoot up. So would you say that more tackles post-COVID would be because of, I guess, youth players and their willingness to play after being quarantined for so long?
So I think the tackle analysis, it's a little bit crude. We did 2 time points in the study, so beginning and end. And I think that just gives us a very general idea that over the course of that sort of 13, 14 seasons, community rugby has progressed. So the players have improved their conditioning. And the game's just gone on, so there's just more events happening. So I wouldn't relate that particular finding to post-COVID. I think certainly the injury incidence appears to have jumped up after COVID. So in the community game, they stopped playing in March 2020, and some of them wouldn't have done any rugby then again until September 2021. So that's quite a long layoff. So we think that could be a possibility for that increase, but it's a little bit speculative.
Thank you. And I had another question. So in a past summer lecture series, we actually reviewed one of your Activate papers, and
Okay.
we did see that it did reduce injury. However, I was just wondering, since I know you began studying women's teams a few years back, if you've seen any impact on Activate and how, I guess, like women's injuries have reduced over that time.
Excellent question. So within the English data set, I wouldn't say we're able to attribute any changes in the women's injuries to Activate. We only have data from the last few seasons, so we wouldn't have data before Activate. But I can talk a little bit about we push Activate quite hard for all community teams, women's teams in particular, because they as people know in the literature, there's a fair amount of knee injuries and concussions that happen in the women's game. So that is a factor why we push that. But also, we are currently coming to the end of a multi-site study between Wales, England, and Scotland, where we have actually tried implementing Activate in women's teams for the first time. So, as you'll know, if you've read the study, Activate was designed and based on data from men's teams, but we wanted to do a study whereby we introduce it to women's teams and see how they get on with it. So that's kind of twofold the results from that study, and we've only just finished, so we haven't processed any results yet. So this is brand new information, I guess. But yeah, we wanted to work out whether women's teams adapted the exercises in any way, if there's any particular exercises they didn't like doing. I know the men don't like doing some of the exercises, so it wouldn't be anything new. Um, but then also we had a study design whereby we could look at the effect of Activate on women's injuries. So there is that work going on. I don't think any other sites in the world are doing that. But yeah, we're just processing the information. But and that could result the results of that could affect possibly result in a women's version of Activate where it's adapted slightly. But yeah, so thanks for that question because it got me to talk about the that piece of work we're doing. So yeah, there is definitely work in place with Women and Activate.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Dr. Roberts, just want to thank you again for this wonderful presentation. I have one question regarding the incidence of the 8-day time loss injuries. I was wondering if you think that the injuries increased maybe because more players started playing rugby, or was it because the actual ratio of players to injuries was that increasing?
Well, the instance is standardized, so it wouldn't be. Do you mean new players taking up the sport, or?
Yeah, yeah. Do you think it might be because there's more players coming into the sport, which might give a possibility for more injuries? That's what I meant.
Uh, we don't have data on that. So we have fairly basic data on our demographics. Like I said, they tend to be just a year or two younger on average at the high playing levels, and they're probably conditioned a little bit better. And then at the lower playing levels, you've probably got players who are a bit older, been playing for a few more years, and falling out of conditioning. So it's it's a difficult one to judge on that. I think generally in the men's community game in England, very few players start playing rugby. They've generally come through a youth age grade system, so they're usually reasonably experienced players that we get in our cohort. So I don't think it's new players taking up the sport would be the factor in there.
Got it. Thank you.
Let's say okay, thanks.
If there are no other questions, I have a question, Dr. Robertson. I guess the jump, and I guess the incentive is obviously the players wanted to get back to their playing goals post-COVID. I mean, it's across the board, the increase in injury rates for type, burden, all across. Do you think just the lack of playing, maybe there was a downtime in playing and the players were not conditioned? Do you think we had that jump, or do you think it was due to the fact of the overeagerness,
I would say
or a
the former.
combination?
Yeah, I would edge towards the former there in terms of players. You get a range of players in this group, right? So you'll get some players who are super fit, really keen. A lot of players don't like doing a lot of conditioning. And possibly over that 18-month period, probably didn't do an awful lot, certainly a lot less than they would have if they'd been playing rugby in the season that they lost. So I think it'd be more about lack of conditioning. Just to bring up a point actually to the previous comment might be related is that and this is something that recently, and this is the information I get by going out and talking to teams at conferences and when we present. They were saying that unfortunately in England some players left the game during COVID and they didn't return. So our playing numbers have reduced. So that's not necessarily anything to do with our shows in our data, because our data is standardized, obviously, in terms of incidents by numbers. But what happened over that period after COVID was that some players who were in second team, so a lot of these clubs have first and second teams. Our data is generally based on that club's first team because that's who can support the project. But after COVID, because the squad sizes reduced in clubs, a lot of those players from the second team, so not quite as good, started playing for the first team and possibly not quite up to that playing standard. So, and this is very anecdotal, but talking to a few teams, they think there's something that those less good, sorry, to be blunt, less good players are starting to play at a high level, but not really that prepared for it.
Hmm.
Every time you
No,
hear this from clubs, you sort of start thinking, I should have included that in somehow in my data set. As always in hindsight. And we try and keep level reporting low in this project so teams don't have to, burden the players with it.
I had one more question, and that is obviously the data is difficult to discern, obviously, between the levels of play. And then obviously you tried looking at injury types over the ligaments and that. But there was a big jump, I guess. Um, I guess what it is that I'm wondering if the influence of the tackle height had a major impact. Obviously, I know we can go into the concussion per se, but maybe varying injuries that were not noted just yet.
So the data set I showed was that was all pre-tackle height. That's kind of why I used that data set. So that the data I was showing went up to 2022, 23. So we didn't have the tackle height in place for that. But
Well, maybe it's easier if you can project. What do you think? And I guess from the little bit of the data that you may have seen, because that's a major thing that everyone is up in arms about, obviously, with the change in the tackle height, um, understanding it a little better, if that's the best way of saying it.
do you mean the players and coaches understanding?
The impact of the tackle height, I guess, change overall in player actions, I guess, and maybe tackling.
Yeah.
I know it's a hard one. Don't I mean
Yeah, no, no.
we're wrestling with it as well.
It's a really good question. So we actually have a lot of tackle analysis going on at the moment of pre and post. So those data that data is coming soon, and World Rugby have a huge project with a number of nations contributing to that to get a hold on how players have adapted to it. One thing I guess I would say is that we're looking for more than one season post tackle height, because there's been some evidence elsewhere that players and officials as well, if the referees are huge, have a huge part to play in the change in tackle height about officiating it properly. So we're looking at more than one season post. So this is why our latest season is our 2 seasons post, and we hope to show hopefully something positive. It doesn't always play out in the data. Sometimes the tackle, when you look at the tackle analysis, it has more of a positive story than plays out in the data. Because, like I said, we can't rule out unintended consequences of players tackling lower. They possibly getting themselves in unfamiliar positions to try and tackle, and then creating injuries from that. So players might. So coming back to your point, I think there is a player education piece, and players getting used to this is now normal. What we have seen, and I don't know if other nations have seen this, and again, this is slightly anecdotal before I look at the tackle analysis, but there's a huge variation in how well referees have officiated the change in tackle height. So we range from, I talk to coaches all the time, and sometimes they say there's 30 penalties a match because of the height, and other referees don't hardly penalize anything; they just want to let the match go. So it's certainly a work in progress. and I think it will take some time for players and coaches to adapt. But it's already less of a talking point in England. I think people have got used to that's how they need to tackle now. But I think they're still adapting.
I'd have to say it's a little challenging here. It's there still a little bit of a resistance in adapting per se. And I guess the biggest thing amongst referees right now is the blue card potential at elite amateur play, uh, and its employment. Have you seen now the blue card being used in community play?
So we don't have the blue card. Could you just remind me, is that a suspected concussion by the referee?
Suspected head impact, correct. To be evaluated to propose that the player gets an HIA.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So I'd like to, yeah, we can talk more about that. So that's employed across USA rugby below professional.
No, no, it's
Okay.
not.
Okay.
Um, the amateur elite is not, it's not employed, but it's been talked about.
Yeah.
But it's only at the professional level, I believe, at the moment. Let me rephrase it, at the international match level.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But have you talked, or is there discussions about that being employed across the levels, or no?
Not as far as I'm aware. I haven't spoken to our game developers at the Rugby Football Union about that, but I don't believe it's a conversation. I guess going a bit broader than the work I do, when we were looking at um, match analysis for our youth age group, so th under 13 to under 18 age groups, we noticed that referees gave very few penalties or foul play for above what was then above. It wasn't sternum height at the time; it was armpit height and above. But lots of penalties, lots of head height and shoulder height tackles were not penalised by the referee. So we thought that was very interesting. We did talk about the fact that perhaps having some sort of warning system for players. I think the referees at that age group want to keep the game flowing. If they don't see anything dangerous, they just want to keep on playing. Also, a lot of the referees are school teachers. They're not quite that highly qualified, but that's how the game works, and that's how it happens. But we did talk about that at the time and say, well, perhaps they could, if they don't want to penalize a player, perhaps show them, we called it like an orange card or something, and say, look, that was a little bit dangerous. We'll let it go, but this is a bit of a warning that you want to change your behavior in the tackle. So yeah, we talked about different levels, but nothing that I don't think is going to pull through.
So I guess, and now the last question will be more of a simpler question. Your severity decreases, but your incidence increases now at the end of your data set. Do you have
Yeah.
any comment on that? Do you think we're um, are the players more conditioned and they're just free, from a fluke being injured with a severe injury, but they're recovering faster because they're in better shape?
It's really hard to say that data set. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Sometimes, yeah, the
No, no,
mean
listen, I understand if you don't have an answer. No,
no,
it's always challenging trying to figure out what the data reflects. I think, and everyone on the call here will understand that, and we know this.
what I would say is, and I perhaps should have shown a figure on this, when we present that as the median rather than the mean, it does tend to be a little bit flatter. As you know, the you can get a few very severe knee injuries that bring that mean quite high up. So I do sometimes present the median on that, and that line does look a little bit more flatter. So sometimes I think in that data set it can just take a few exceptionally severe injuries. The players are out for a year or so. It's difficult in the community game as well because when we get our severity data, that can sometimes be forecasted because the physiotherapist will might lose contact with the player. So it's difficult to get the severity measures on those sometimes. So we don't always get a full set on that. but generally speaking, yeah, they're pretty high severity.
Well, again, I don't have any more questions, but thank you for trying to answer those. And again, I know it's always hard when you're looking at that longitudinal data to try to give you insight. Because when we do our I guess our pit manuscripts and we look at our data by periods or windows, it's just a snapshot. But when you look at it, the long-term longitudinal data, it's very challenging to interpret it because of the varying amount of variables.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think it just shows as well. Like the study we run is relatively has relatively good numbers, but it just shows that once you're breaking those down into certain body sites and the knee, you really need really strong data sets to be able to really pull out any other risk factors and more sensitive information. So even with a fairly good community project which we're running, you don't sometimes get the detail that you need. I would refer everyone on to maybe you've read it as well, everyone, but that we have our premiership, so our professional level knee injury paper that Stephen West wrote a year or two back, and that has plenty of detail as well for professional level knee injuries. But yeah, so it's a good comparison. If you're looking at the incidents in that paper, though, remember they're 24-hour time loss injuries, whereas the data I present today were 8-day time loss, so the incidents would be quite different.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Um, and more, I guess more importantly, one last question, Simon, sorry. Um, when you launched the Activate, it appears that the incidence of injury continued to increase. It didn't flatline, but is there a combination? I guess there was a question, a young Gabriel presented that is the fact that more were involved, or was there more awareness of injury, or maybe you just have a better data collection system employed now?
Yeah, no, that's a really perceptive thing you've picked up on there. So yeah, we're very proud of Activate, but actually injuries tend to go up still after we introduced it. So yeah, it's a really good point. What I would say is when we did the Activate program, so there's the clubs that were involved in the RCT were involved in that data set. But actually, when you break it down into, because it was an RCT, only a small number of actual clubs took part in the whole RCT, and only a smaller number actually in that data set actually received Activate. So actually in that data set, only throughout that season 15-16, only a small number of clubs actually received it. And then I think it just goes to show that, and this is the same with exercise prevention programs all across the knee control ones that have been done, FIFA 11 plus. We know they work, but when they're put out into a real world context and you just give everyone the resources and you say, here we go use this brilliant program, it's going to reduce your injuries, they're not that well taken up. We don't have numbers on how many teams actually use Activate across England. It's probably one of our big weaknesses that I'd like to pick up and just try and understand that a little bit more. So at the moment, it's just Activate's out there, everyone can access it, but how well they access it and how completely they use the program, we don't really know. But there tends to be a bit of a drop off across any injury prevention program when it's rolled out compared to what you see in an RCT.
Again, thank you so much for trying to answer. And I think our young high school student, Miss Coe from California, has a question for you.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Mina Ko, and I'm a rising senior in high school right now. Do you see many differences in knee injury rates depending on things like how old the players were, or like how much experience they had, or how well the clubs were funded? Because I remember you mentioned that coaches from higher levels would teach lower level teams, and that might have improved their performance. But I was wondering like more about the like rates of injury.
And that's another excellent question. So we didn't analyze and use age as a variate in the analysis. Um, Yeah, I can't. It's difficult to answer because we didn't do that. In terms of the club resources, so you're saying clubs with more resource might get fewer injuries, perhaps, or
Yeah, based on like if they have more not like more funding to have more knowledge on like injury prevention or just like in general.
yeah, possibly. Again, we don't have data on how well each club is resourced, but I think that that could be a factor. I mean, I talk about community clubs here, and some are really have very little resource. They struggle to get a physiotherapist. Others are incredible. Even at a lower level, they have people with real expertise, sort of driving things forward. So it's not always a playing level thing. Um, but unfortunately, we don't, yeah, we're not able to layer that as a variant on in terms of how well, what resources those clubs have. Sometimes I do find the clubs that are well resourced, yes, they can provide more prevention programs, but sometimes they also report better. So it kind of offsets with that. They're more diligent about their reporting. So yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
not a clear-cut answer again, I'm afraid. Such is the complexity of the range of clubs that we have across the board. But thank you for the question.
All right, and that will conclude week 6 of the Rugby Research and Injury Prevention Group Summer Lecture Series. We would like to give a big thank you to Dr. Roberts for joining us today and everyone else in the audience as well. Everybody have a good night and thank you.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.